We believe that the fundamentals which underpinned the creation of our organization must adapt to the profound changes in our society. The theme of this session, peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability, is topical, evocative, and deserves particular attention on our part. There is a coup epidemic in Africa. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the continent has been hit by an epidemic of military pushes, particularly in the French-speaking country south of the Sahara. Everyone condemns them, sanctions them, is disturbed by the sudden resurgence of this phenomenon that we had thought was a thing of the past, and rightly so. But what I wish to say is that the international community must have the honesty and the rectitude to not content itself simply with denouncing the consequences. Rather, it must look to and address the causes. Coups d'etat have multiplied in Africa in recent years because there are deep-rooted reasons for this. And to remedy the problem, ladies and gentlemen, we must look at these root causes. The putschist is not only the person who takes up arms to overthrow a regime. I want us all to be well aware of the fact that the real putschists, the most numerous, and those who avoid any condemnation, are also those who plot and scheme, who use trickery, who cheat to manipulate the text of the Constitution in order to stay in power eternally. It is those in white-collar jobs who change the rules of the game as the game unfolds in order to keep the reins of power in their hands. These are the most numerous kinds of putschists. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I am one of those who one day decided to shoulder our responsibility to prevent our country from slipping into complete chaos, into an insurrection. No political forces at the time had the courage nor the means to put an end to the duplicity that we were experiencing, as they were all completely neutralized back then. The institutional correction for which my brothers in arms and I took responsibility on September 5th, 2021, was only a consequence of that chaotic situation which had ended up tearing apart the social fabric of my country and undermining our coexistence. This is not an exhaustive list, but we believe that the transitions underway in Africa are due to several factors, including broken promises, the lethargy of the people, and leaders tampering with constitutions with the sole concern of remaining in power to the detriment of collective well-being. Today, the African people are more awake than ever and more than ever determined to take their destiny into their own hands. The unequal distribution of wealth creates endless inequalities, famine, abject poverty, which make the daily lives of our populations increasingly difficult. These inequalities are part of the causes for the events that endanger our peaceful coexistence above all. When the wealth of a country is in the hands of an elite, while newborns die in hospitals due to a lack of incubators, it is not surprising that in such conditions we are seeing transitions in order to respond to the profound aspirations of the people. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, is suffering from a governance model that has been imposed on it. A model that is certainly good and effective for the West, which developed it over the course of its history, but which is difficult to incorporate and adapt to our realities, our customs, our environment. Alas, I have to say that the graft did not take. I know that when I say this, many will immediately say to themselves, oh, another warmonger who wants to wring the neck of democracy, or another soldier who wants to impose dictatorship. However, I want to say very clearly, without hypocrisy, without pretense, eye to eye, we're all aware that this democratic model that you have so insidiously, skillfully imposed on us after the La Baule summit in France, something you've been imposing almost religiously, this model does not work. Various economic and social indices demonstrate this plain and clear. This is not a value judgment on democracy itself. Believe me, this is just taking stock of the situation. It's a balance sheet. Over several decades of chaotic experimentation with this model in our environment, we can make this observation. This was a period full of nothing but political games. And this, of course, has been to the detriment of what is essential, namely the economy and the local processing of our natural resources. Allow me to take this truth exercise a little further. Through my short but very intense experience of managing estates, Guinea, I have come to better understand the extent to which this model has, above all, contributed to maintaining a system of exploitation and plunder of our resources by others, and a rampant corruption of our elites. National leaders who have often been granted democratic labels based on their acquiescence or their capacity for selling off the resources and the property of their people, or perhaps their ease in giving in to the pseudo recommendations and injunctions of the great powers. I must confess in this regard that everything that I am facing goes beyond all imagination. These are the same people who profess democracy, transparency, who denounce poor governance and corruption, who dictate the rules. It is they who, behind the scenes, very discreetly and underhandedly, are increasing pressure to make us cede our national wealth through unconscionable leonine contracts. I understand certain leaders and some of my predecessors who, because they possessed certain weaknesses, because they were under pressure, or because they had skeletons in their closets, or particularly because they had a political agenda, gave in to what was being asked of them. I understand them, even if I do not approve. In some cases, I was even reminded that if I had a political agenda, I would be less comfortable carrying out the reforms that my government and I are tackling. One thing is certain. We have but one concern, and that is the well-being of the people and living together. This is our priority. This is why the transition I lead has chosen to focus methodically on clear objectives in a precise order: the social, the economic, and the political. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I wear my uniform in service to my people. I would be grateful if you would respect that oath. An oath to keep ourselves a respectable distance from divisions of all kinds that many attempt to fuel in our countries. The Sahel is undergoing one of the most serious crises in its very long history. But it has the resources that are required to face it. Its legendary sense of diplomacy must be unleashed so that we can speak to each other without interference. It was for this reason that ECOWAS whose vocation was economic. Stopped getting involved in politics and favored dialogue. The African people are tired, exhausted by the categorizations with which everyone wants to box us in. Africa's population is young. It did not experience the Cold War. It did not experience the ideological wars that have shaped the world over the last 70 years. That is why we, Africans, are insulted by the boxes, the categories, which sometimes place us under the influence of the Americans, sometimes under that of the British, sometimes the French, or the Chinese, or the Russians, and even the Turks. We are neither pro nor anti-American. We are neither pro nor anti-Chinese, nor pro or anti-French, nor pro or anti-Russian, nor pro or anti-Turkish. We are simply pro-African, that is all. Placing us under the influence of this or that power is an insult. It is contempt and racism towards a continent of more than 1,300,000,000 people. It is important that in this prestigious and influential assembly, we understand clearly and definitively that the era of the old Africa is over. With a population of more than 1 billion Africans, around 70% of whom are young people who are completely free, open-minded, open to the world, and determined to take their destiny into their own hands. The time has come to realize the structures, the rules from the post-war era, established in the absence of our states, which did not yet exist at the time, are obsolete. This is the end of an unbalanced and unjust era where we had no say in the matter. It is time to take our rights into account and to let us take our proper place, but also, and above all, it is time to stop lecturing us and to stop treating us with condescension like children. Rest assured that we are old enough to know what is good for us. We are mature enough to define our priorities, to design our own models which are in line with our identity.
Welcome to my channel. So as you have heard the speech by the Guinea leader, Colonel Mamadi. That speech is very refreshing, very powerful, and even very, very scholastic. He has spoken there like a professor. He has analyzed Africa's history and how the UN and the West are out of touch with reality. Like you said there, the UN itself is very much out of touch. They're still sticking to the old system that they had when they were founded after the Second World War. For example, the Permanent Security Council members, which are 5, Russia, US, China, Britain, France, they're the ones controlling UN and they can veto. But the rest of the countries plus Africa are just there to obey and to follow the decision made by the veto members. But now this year's UN Assembly, only one veto member leader attended, only Biden of US. The rest, Russia, China, France, England, skipped the assembly. Very interesting. So the speech by the African leaders shows some unity. That UN needs to change. Like these permanent secretary members, they're very powerful. They're the ones running UN. Of course, are the financiers of UN, the major financiers. But you find that the world is changing. And these members of UN, permanent powerful members, they are like out of touch with the world realities. So the world has changed. UN is, and even the world, seems to be divided in two broad divisions. Like the Guinea leaders said, we have the West, with like France and America, Joe Biden and Macron. And then we have the emerging leaders. Like in Africa, Russia and China really penetrated and they've overthrown the West. So the West thinks that Africa, an African country, must either be pro-American, either pro-West, or pro-Russia and pro-China. But now you see that Africa should not be defined like that. Africa must have its own place, and in fact, Africa being exploited by any of these powers, that should not be the case. Those days are over. Africa too must have its own voice. You see, now we have this pro-West. We have pro-West and pro-East. So they have their own voices. But now Africa too is part of the world. So what about pro-Africa? Africa too must have its own decision, make its own choice whether to go pro-West or pro-East, depending on which one gives a better deal. So that's the opinion of Colonel Mamadi of Guinea and other African leaders. So this time, for the first time, it seems like African leaders have spoken with one voice. So the other more world divisions, we find that when UN was formed, the World Bank and IMF also are formed. But now, like other African leaders have said, this World Bank and IMF, their conditions are meant to make Africans poor, to remain poor and indebted. So these all systems, they all have colonial mentality. And this mentality must be brought down because the world has changed. If they do not change their mentality, they will not survive. Because new options are emerging to counter World Bank and IMF. New lenders are emerging. So we find that BRICS is emerging to counter World Bank and IMF. It's not to say that now BRICS will now be the new colonial master, no. It's about which one brings a better deal. IMF and World Bank, they are too colonial-minded and they refuse to change. Their conditions are still very high. They still require retrenchment, privatization of public corporations, to make African countries poor. So if BRICS and the BRICS Bank and the BRICS lenders, if they'll bring a better deal, that's good. So what African leaders are saying is that BRICS will not become like World Bank with the new colonial mentality, no. But even now BRICS is challenged to now bring a better deal. Because Africa will now choose which one has a favorable deal. So the world is changing, and the era of exploitation, whether by BRICS or World Bank, will not be allowed. And Africa is for Africans, just like Ramaphosa of South Africa said. So Ramaphosa of South Africa said that African resources are for Africa. Ramaphosa said that Americans and Europe, they count their resources. They also include their African resources as belonging to them. For example, France, when they count their resources, they claim that the countries like Niger, Gabon, Niger's uranium, Gabon's oil, Congo gold, those are all part of the resources. That is wrong. So that mindset should change. They must know that those era of colonialism is over and Africa's resources belong to Africa. That was a speech by Ramaphosa of South Africa. Very powerful speech. But this time, these African leaders, they didn't share notes, I doubt. But somehow when they spoke with the same voice that the era of exploiting Africa is over. And Africa must have its own ground. The era of Western countries placing puppets in the guise of democracy in Africa, that era is over. And that if there's a Western puppet placed in Africa by the West, there'll be a coup. And the coup will bring in a leader who will help the people of Africa. Not to say that coups are the best, no. But if the West brings their puppets, then they'll be overthrown. And even if that military who's a leader is also a puppet or corrupt, even him will be overthrown. So Africa is rising. And the West will not dictate how we run our affairs, who we choose, and how we sell our resources. So these new cool leaders like Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they have that new mentality. They reflect the new African mentality, that Africa has changed. And not surprisingly, most African population who are young, they support these cool leaders. That's not to say that democracy is bad, but democracy has kind of failed. Democracy puppets, they are serving their masters who are in the West. And these cool leaders, the policies they are bringing, like this Burkina Faso leader policy, Niger leader policy, they are more in touch with the people's aspirations. And you can't deny that. The West can't deny that. But funny enough, African leaders who went to UN, they spoke in the same voice, the same tone, which shows that Africa people on the ground, they are crying for change. Not just in Guinea, but all over Africa, they are crying for change. Even those countries that have puppets, Western puppets, their people are in support of these cool leaders. Whether you go to Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, which are controlled by more conservative leaders who support the West, but the people in these countries support the new mentality brought by these cool leaders. But you find that even these African leaders who support the West, like Ruto, the Ghana president, Tinubu of Nigeria, when they went to UN, they spoke and they carried Africa's voice. And they spoke the same way like the cool leaders. So Africa spoke in the same voice that the era of exploitation is over and UN is archaic. UN should change the way it is organized. And Africa must be well represented. That's what Ruto said. And even IMF and World Bank should also change. They were given a warning. They should change their conditions. Because the world is now multilateral, multipolar, not unipolar. The era of Cold War, US dominance is over, and Africa is emerging also. And its voice can't be ignored by anyone. So, Ruto, who is Kenya's president, went there. He gave a very powerful speech there also, that UN Security Council is dysfunctional, undemocratic, non-inclusive, not representative. It's incapable of delivering meaningful progress in our world. And the rampant impunity of certain actors of global stage cannot settle world progress. So Ruto had a powerful speech there, which was in line with other African leaders. Guinea leader Mamadi, we have seen his speech. Africa suffers from a poor governance system imposed by the West. And Africa must have good leaders who respond to the needs of African people, not puppets of the West. So his speech is similar like Ruto's. They want Africa to be fully respected. Africa's system of governance, Africa's voice, etc., to be fully recognized and respected worldwide. So the era of exploitation is over. So these leaders, they had the same mentality, but and imagine they never shared notes, which shows that Africa's people on the ground and even their leaders, they have the same mentality that era of exploitation is over. We have a wind of change. In Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa also has the same pattern. He said that we strongly condemn tendencies by some powerful countries who preach peace, human rights, and democracy, but yet they secretly fund conflicts and changes in our governments to pursue their own narrow interests. So he's warning the West. So the West are preaching peace, human rights, but they're also funding other clandestine conflicts in Africa. And the UN is just watching, not even helping. That's Mnangagwa. The same pattern. So these African leaders, they're now very bold. They don't cower like before. Salva Kiir of South Sudan also, the same pattern. We call upon the UN to lift the arms embargo imposed on us, to aid peace implementation and to secure the elections. The embargo has impeded implementation of the security arrangements. So he's saying that here that UN is, instead of helping this new African country of South Sudan, UN has placed embargo on this country. Therefore, this embargo has really affected the country's development and even peace. So UN needs to change. It seems like UN is seen by these African leaders and Africans, it's like UN is supporting the West to impede African progress through embargoes. And then when the Western countries are supporting clandestine conflicts in Africa, UN is just on standby. Their peacekeeping missions are not doing enough. That's why countries like DRC and even Mali, they're kicking out the peacekeeping missions from UN. So UN is very inactive. They're not helping Africa very much. That's the opinion of these African leaders and even most Africans on the ground. So African leaders had the same voice, whether Ruto, Mamadi of Guinea, Mnangagwa, Salva Kiir, the same voice, that Africa is supposed to be recognized and respected by the global powers. President Teodera of Central African Republic also, the same pattern. Migrant crisis is one of the most appalling consequences of the plunder of Africa's resources, made by these Western countries. Western imperialism, terrorism, and armed conflicts. So with them, he's talking about the idea of migrant crisis in Europe. It is caused by the plunder of these same Western countries. They plunder African resources, therefore leaving Africa poor. So therefore the people of this continent have to go to look for survival in those European countries. So if Western countries will stop plundering African resources, Africa will develop and there'll be no migrant crisis. Simple. So this is an era of the truth. These African leaders, they're very bold, they're speaking the truth, that Africa's poverty is caused by the West, by the Western imperialism, among other things. And in all these things, UN is just a passive observer, not helping anything. And then South Africa President Ramaphosa also gave a powerful speech that Africa's resources are for Africa, not the West, not the East. The era of Africa selling soil or raw resources is over. Africa will manufacture and process those minerals and sell them at a proper price that will benefit the people. So all these leaders, they have the same voice, that Africa will no longer stand to be neglected and exploited like a child. Africa must be respected and no more exploited by the West and other people. So Colonel Mamadi is the one who gave the most outstanding speech, in my view. He also said that we are not children. We should not be told who to support or who to sell our minerals to. We'll sell our minerals to who gives a better deal, the best price. And nobody should tell us how to rule ourselves. Nobody should impose leaders on us. Like, for example, we find that Libya, Gaddafi was a dictator. But Libya progressed very much, even more than some European countries, when Gaddafi was there. But after Gaddafi was removed, the country is now split, two governments. So much chaos, so much problems. Is that the kind of Africa that the West wants? Because when the West moves in, there's chaos, there's plunder. Even in Libya right now, with all that chaos, the oil of that country is still being exploited by the Western multinationals. So they're getting what they want. But the people are suffering. Gaddafi's infrastructure has been developed. No, Gaddafi's infrastructure has been destroyed. Even the recent flooding in Libya could not be mitigated because NATO forces destroyed the infrastructure when they killed Gaddafi. So now there's chaos in Libya. It was the most developed country in Africa those days. People are getting free medicine in the days of Gaddafi. But when the West moved in, the country is now split. There's one government in Libya that is UN recognized. Another one is a rebel government. Complete chaos. Even Sudan. It's like Sudan is following the same pattern like Libya. We have two rebel generals. One is backed by the West, one is backed by the East. But while all this is going on, the country's resources for Sudan, it is gold. It is still being exploited. So the West are getting what they want. But the people are suffering. Famine. So much. That's why the speech by this Guinea leader is very, very accurate. It touches the needs of Africa and is very bold. No foreigner can come in and tell us how to live our lives. Africa must have its own space to decide its own governance system and even who to sell for or who to sell to the minerals. That's why you wonder why France is refusing to leave Niger. They're still seeing Niger as their territory. So it's a very good time to be in Africa. It's a very exciting moment that African leaders stood firm and spoke boldly at the UN that the era of Africa being exploited and undermined is over. So that's all for today. Let me see your opinions in the comment section. Otherwise, thank you very much.